Hey there, this is your teacher, Mr. H.
And I am Jack, class of 2023, today's student host.
And you're watching History in a Hoodie.
Today's episode is about government instability in Africa, where we learn all about why people don't trust their government in many African nations and why that's a major problem. I can't wait to find out.
Well then, let's get this show started.
What are we learning about today?
The standard for today's lesson asks the students to describe the impact of government instability on the access to education and the distribution of medicine and food to combat diseases and famine across Africa. Let's review some vocabulary before we go over this lesson.
Government instability means distrust in the leadership of a country due to factors like corruption and criminal behavior, failed economic policies, inabilities to provide public service, or violence towards its citizens. Famine is an extreme scarcity of food usually caused by crop failures, overpopulation, war, or poor government policies. HIV is a disease, human immunodeficiency virus which attacks white blood cells and causes the immune system to shut down. AIDS is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, the resulting set of symptoms after HIV has eliminated the immune system, leaving the body vulnerable to other deadly diseases.
Let's observe a couple case studies of examples of the types of governments found in some African countries. South Africa is a country whose government instability we already know well. Apartheid laws caused a racial divide in trusting the government up until the 1990s. Other than Nelson Mandela, the modern leaders of South Africa's government have not upheld democratic values and have given the people of South Africa a reason to distrust their government. Jacob Zuma, who was president of South Africa up until 2017, was forced to resign for corruption, fraud, and organized crime. During his legal battle over these charges, South Africa's economy has shrunk by over $80 billion. The country of South Sudan has only appeared on maps worldwide since 2011 and is already one of the poorest nations in the world. Fighting has been the way of life in the country since the region, including neighbor Sudan, gained its independence from Great Britain in 1955, and it has continued even after the conclusion of the Sudanese Civil War and the division of the country. Armed opposition groups and angry communities are just a few examples of how this country is still divided on how to move forward, and the leadership of President Kiir has not been successful in unifying the groups. Somalia, on the East African coast, is another example of a failed state. Bordering on anarchy, there is almost no organized central government, and some states and regions have reverted to clan-based leadership, ignoring national leadership. Human rights abuses, arrests and detentions, and police violence have all contributed to a humanitarian catastrophe. As a result, organized crime and piracy have taken over parts of the nation where the governments have left unnoticed. This has created a nation that is essentially a safe haven for terrorists. These three nations are just some examples of countries in Africa with political instability. According to a 2015 survey, the nations of Somalia, Nigeria, Sudan, the Central African Republic, and Libya all ranked in the top 10 of the most extreme political violence. Of the 53 nations in Africa, only a handful ranked as low risk on the same survey.
So what? How does the government instability impact the people of a country?
The purpose of government, as we understand it, is to provide services to help its citizens. A lot of these services are for basic safety purposes, like police and the military, which should make its citizens feel more comfortable in their country. But, as the case study demonstrated, in many African countries, this is not the case. Probably one of the most important services a government provides is education. As we have studied in our economics units, there is a direct correlation between literacy and standard of living. But, on top of living a better life, education trains people to live healthier lives. There are a couple examples of failure to educate that are drastically affecting African people's lives: disease and famine. Diseases have spread rapidly throughout certain regions of the African continent, One example of a disease that was in the news a few years ago was Ebola. This deadly virus is transmitted through contact with bodily fluids like blood. Normally, this disease would not spread quickly because most people understand not to contact other people's blood. However, that basic understanding of disease transmission and good hygiene is lacking. Governments have attempted to spread correct information about preventing the spread of disease, but many citizens do not listen to their government leaders because of deep distrust, and this distrust could cost them their lives. Another disease that is rapidly spreading through several countries is HIV. HIV is a virus that kills off the immune system and leads to AIDS, the deadly result of HIV, where the body is left open to invasion by all kinds of diseases. HIV is spread through sexual contact with an infected individual or by sharing needles with an infected person, and the only way to prevent transmission is to avoid contact with body fluids of an infected person. This knowledge is commonly taught and understood in countries with stable governments that properly educate their citizens, and transmission rates are low. Countries like South Africa and Zimbabwe have around a quarter of their population infected by this deadly disease, and the rate of infection has only increased over the last few decades. Access to education is not a guaranteed right in all corners of the world like it is in the United States and many other developed countries. Free education to all children, even less so. In many countries in Africa, families must pay school tuition, pay for books, pay for uniforms, and pay for classroom supplies for their children to attend. In impoverished countries, that often lends to the low literacy rates and a growing gap between educated male children and female children. Countries experiencing extreme poverty, famine and drought, conflict, and corruptive governments often neglect education, sadly, when education simply could be the answer to all their problems in the future. Drought also has impacted many African countries recently, which of course can be a factor in famine. But poor farming practices have led to soil infertility and erosion of topsoil as well. Again, these problems could have been prevented with proper education in agricultural technology, but these are not the only issues that cause food shortages. Civil wars interrupt farmers' daily lives, and sometimes warring governments have used food as a weapon by denying food shipments to political enemies. All of these problems, plus disease and famine, impact the health and life expectancy of people in African countries. Parents die from disease frequently, leaving their children orphaned to fend for themselves. Teachers and doctors die from disease and starvation as well, leaving students and patients without help. Many adults are too ill to be productive workers, putting their families into poverty and the national economy struggling as well. Each of these problems is causing more and more problems, and it is going to require major interventions to end this cycle.
Now what? What am I going to do with this information?
As it has been clearly demonstrated in several African nations, people need to be able to trust in their leadership if society is going to grow positively. If people cannot trust in their government, people will be harmed, possibly beyond repair. The United States has been fortunate to have had mostly positive leaders for over 200 years of existence. Leaders who have respected democratic values, limited power, established judicial principles, and have worked to improve the lives of all Americans. And we also have the ability to remove leaders who do not uphold our values by voting them out. Our vote is our most important right, a right, I might add, that isn't usually found in these countries with unstable leadership. When we consider who to vote for, more important than political positions is, do we trust the leader to lead? Can we ask ourselves questions like, do we trust this leader to give us correct information in a crisis? Do we trust this leader to defend our country and keep us safe? Do we trust this leader to make the best decision for us by understanding all the information and listening to the smartest people? We need the best of the best running our country to make sure we remain a strong and healthy country going forward. The examples of these unstable African countries should be enough to understand what happens if we don't have the best of the best in charge.
Wow, so learning about government instability is really important for me to understand. I'm glad I learned it today.
Right you are. Are you ready for some review questions?
Yep. Many groups and countries around the world are willing to contribute to help reduce famine in Africa. What problem makes it difficult to get these contributions to citizens of African countries? Which of these is a human cause of famine? Which statement below describes the rate of HIV/AIDS infection in sub-Saharan Africa? Why is there a gap in literacy rate between males and females in many African countries? Use the chart. Which statement is likely to be true based on the information in the chart?
Thank you, Jack, for co-hosting with me today. I hope all the rest of you learned a lot from today's episode of History in a Hoodie about government instability in Africa. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Just kidding, I don't care about that stuff, but do make sure you study this lesson.
Bye.
Bye now.